Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session today. This session is part of the AI machine learning track, and it's titled, Why is your model stuck in the lab and what to do about it? Let me introduce Mr. Jeff Moore. Jeff is a senior data scientist at Southern California Edison and provides data science and analytics service through his own consulting and training firm, More Big Data. Prior to start with SCCE, he worked 15 years at Johnson & Johnson and various IT and management capacities. He holds an MS degree with data science from Northwestern University and a Master of Business Administration from New York University, as well as a certification in data analytics from USC, machine learning and Lean Six Sigma. He worked promoting STEAM education in venture accounting and served as a district commissioner in the area of health service in Santa Barbara County. Thank you, Mr. Jeff, to be here with us today, and I will let you start your session.
Well, that's fantastic. I appreciate everyone joining today, and I hope that you're remaining safe. You and your families are remaining safe from this horrible COVID. But why are we here today? Today, we're going to talk quite a bit about models and why models often get stuck in the lab. And what I mean by that is it sort of becomes like an exploratory clinical exercise versus actually moving toward production. And what can we do about that? How can we pre-select ideas and problems that have a high likelihood of making it to production? So the agenda that we have here, we don't have a ton of time. I think we've got roughly 30, 35 minutes. And I'm hopeful that this is going to be an interactive session. So we're going to jump right into it. We're going to first look at the top sort of challenges associated with modeling, with data science, with ML. And then we're going to talk about what mitigations are there, right? What levers can we pull on in order to solve some of the challenges associated with ML? And then lastly, I'm going to give you a real live use case, something I've personally experienced in the past and what I did or some of the tools and techniques I used to push my model, push my idea along. I should first mention about California, Southern California Edison. I mean, this is utility companies are really interesting because of the breadth of the problems, the breadth of the data, the interactions we have, the sensors, the IoT, et cetera. And this screen here is a really good example of that. Look at that 15 million customers, all the assets, the telephone poles are assets. There are things that are hanging off those telephone poles, they're assets. All of the wire, we call it conductor, hanging between the poles. We monitor all of that. And all of that monitoring means that there's data floating around and all the calls and all the website hits, et cetera. It presents tons of data, tons of opportunity to frankly impact a business. And I think that's what we're all here to do, right? We're trying to figure out how do we, through our techniques, through our insights, how do we impact the business? As Ruben said, my path into data science was certainly a windy road. And I say that because I think it's really important that as you all are kind of thinking about if you're new to data science or you're new to some of this technology stuff, your road doesn't have to be a linear thing, right? And if you spend a ton of time on LinkedIn or some of the other websites, there's always this sort of notion that you have to become an expert in statistics, or you have to become an expert in linear algebra, or you have to become an expert in computer science. And while there's some truth in each one of those, the point that I'm trying to make here on this particular slide is that data scientists come in all shapes and sizes. So don't believe the hype. Each of you likely have a unique lens that you look at problems through. And because of that diversity, often the problems that are going to be presented are going to be, or the solutions rather, are going to be unique because again, there's multiple lenses that we're kind of looking at these problems through. So definitely hit me up on LinkedIn. Would love to get connected with all of you and hopefully stay connected post the event. So let's kind of look at, and hopefully you can see my screen. It may be a little bit small. Maybe I can go to screen share. So here we have something that typically you see if you're doing some research on why models have challenges. And what I've done on this particular slide is I've given you a 2018 view and I've given you a 2020 view. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because I wanted to basically show you that it's not as if these problems are going away. These challenges are going away. In fact, they're quite consistent. Now, the thing that I'm trying to highlight here is I was sort of looking at my LinkedIn feed not so long ago, and Ben there was posting, and he was saying that, writing models, there's very little effort in actually writing the model, but there's a ton of effort in figuring out what's wrong with the data. And again, there's a lot of truth to the data issues that I think all of us are kind of familiar with in this profession. However, what I want to focus on is all the non-tech, non-data things that seem to pop. And if you look at my slide here, half of the items that are not half of the items that are mentioned here, frankly, have absolutely nothing to do with the data or the tech. It's everything to do with alignment, everything to do with how the data science team in your enterprise is positioning the models, positioning the solution. So let's dive into a couple of these. Look at those first two at the very top, because I think there's a lot of association there. Lack of management support, lack of a clear question you're trying to answer. How many times have I personally been given a challenge, and the first thing that I want to do is go jump into my IDE or jump into Jupyter or jump onto some cloud collab type tool and start coding away, right? Start just sort of diving in. And really, that's not really what I should be doing. What I should be doing is finding out the motivations behind the challenge that was sort of given to me. What I should be doing is trying to clearly articulate what the problem is. And because of that exercise, or because of that sort of pausing, you'll have the opportunity to not only interact with some of the key stakeholders, SMEs, et cetera, but what you'll really do is once you've kind of gotten a clear idea, you'll be able to socialize that idea. The results are not used by the decision makers. The question there is where's this model going to be exposed? How is this model going to be used? Is it going to be one more dashboard on top of all the other dashboards that we often find in corporate America? So the question is how are we exposing the model, and are we exposing it in a way that's useful for decision makers? And then look at those last two. If you if you're new to this field, or even if you've been around for a while, I know that this science is not a silver bullet for data challenges. It's certainly not a silver bullet for broken processes. It's not a silver bullet to solve the world's issues. So what we're trying to do here is manage the expectations of management or senior leaders so that they understand that, hey, you know what? Once we come up with a really good model, what we might need to do is socialize it with our customers. Once we come up with a really awesome model, what we might need to do is reorganize our processes. So we need to keep in mind or help management understand what is it we're going to be getting from the model. And then let's kind of move over to the right a little bit. Notice there definitely are a couple themes here, especially that senior management alignment item. And notice that there is this new concept though, right? And the new concept is because there are certainly some really aggressive companies out there and they're moving on data science incredibly quickly. Those companies now are starting to see that, again, multiple departments, hidden IT, shadow IT, I believe is the term that most of us are familiar with. You're starting to see pockets of data scientists kind of sprinkled around the organization. And now you've got a different kind of problem Maybe your problem now is you're not sharing model knowledge. You're not sharing some of the latest and greatest research. You're not sharing what the learnings are about data. So for those companies that are incredibly aggressive in moving into this field, then there's this possibility of how's the data science team organized, and is the sharing and the collaboration and the culture there that's allowing the sharing of the knowledge. So I think it's incredibly beneficial sometimes for us to kind of step back and sort of look at how the landscape is changing. And again, I think this slide and some of the articles that I've mentioned here would be helpful in doing that. So let's talk about how we might actually go about solving the issues that we're seeing with regard to uh, the challenges that we see. Okay, so let's go back to that problem statement example I gave on the previous slide, and this is exactly why I'm saying in my early intro, if you were a former consultant, if you were a former project manager, this is exactly where you can shine. You're used to being able to look at things incredibly broadly, and you're able to kind of look at things from end to end, and you're able to say things like, huh, let's see how this might fit, or let's see what other issues I might have because of that previous experience that you're bringing to the data science team. So what you're going to do in that particular case is you're going to go around and you're talk to stakeholders. That's an important first step, building those relationships, establishing credibility. And I really love item number 2 here, doing some EDA, exploratory data analysis. I can't tell you how many times problems or issues have come to me, and I run off and I'll do a little bit of research, and I might just put a couple of little graphs together. I might just kind of throw something into Power BI, effectively just saying, hey, look at the data that we have available to us. Are we even able to build a model with any kind of predictive power? Hey, how can we solve this particular gap? Do you know that I went over to talk to that team, and that team's not quite ready from a culture standpoint because they don't believe in the science associated with ML or data science. So the EDA component is absolutely huge. I'll find oftentimes before I even get to the model that the EDA has delivered so much value and impact that when we get to the model, it's kind of anticlimactic because folks are charged with what they see from the EDA, and they frankly now have some direction in terms of how to go about solving certain things. And then lastly, what you're going to most likely end up doing is formalizing some alternative problem statements. So you were given this initial problem statement, but how is that? Once we've done some EDA, you've talked to some subject matter experts, what other hypothesis might we want to be looking at or testing once we have more data? Then we're going to integrate this model. Now, I said earlier, it's all about where things are exposed. So if you're trying to drive a behavioral shift, are you linking your model to the most critical processes in the business? Or again, are we setting up another scorecard or another metric or another whatever? We have to figure out ways to expose our models inside of existing workflows so that we have a higher likelihood of adoption. I love this next one, right? So once we've got a model that frankly has quite a bit of leg, and it's got quite a bit of energy and excitement behind it, let's talk about how we might expose that model now from an API standpoint so that it becomes callable by other legacy applications, not just the one that we sort of focused on in MVP or released early releases of the tool. How do we ensure that decision makers are using this? One of the things that I like to do is I like to try to figure out what metrics matter to management, right? What is management worried about? Now, we in the profession, we're often concerned about what we might see in a confusion matrix. Our AUC seems to be, we're looking at loss or sensitivity or whatever. And don't get me wrong, all those things are important from a tech standpoint. But oftentimes, those things don't mean a ton to our senior leaders. So we've got to figure out what metrics matter. What is it we're trying to influence? Is it customer retention? Is it we want to have better interactions with our customers? Are we trying to reduce safety incidents? Are we trying to reduce loss on our accounts receivable? Those kinds of things. So we've got to figure out what metrics matter, and then we got to figure out how our model is going to impact the metrics that matter. At number two, there is really important. Often management is not super familiar with data science, with ML, what it can do, what it does. So let's just maybe start with very simple examples like a linear regression, right? What is this mean squared error thing? And what is it that we're trying to do there in terms of a best fit line? Start with the basics. I know all of us get super excited about computer vision and NLP and some of the other sort of TensorFlow and all the other sort of built-in libraries associated there, especially around Keras. But oftentimes those things are really tough to explain. So I like to kind of start with the basics. Let's talk about linear regression. Let's talk about logistic regression. What are those models trying to do? Because it's easy to explain, right? The formula itself is relatively straightforward, and you can show some data and some correlation, and it gets management really sort of intrigued and frankly more educated on what these models can do and how frankly they can help the business. And then lastly, meeting the expectations. So what we want to do here in meeting the expectations is we really want to now get into the change management side of things. And what I mean here is when I say change management, I'm not talking about IT change management. What I'm referring to here is the communication, the training plan, the aligning process. I often like to try to find out what corporate goals we have and try to figure out what model am I trying to implement so that it attaches itself to that corporate goal. And I'm going to give you an example here in a moment of exactly how we went about doing that. And I can't stress this one enough. Educating, educating, and educating, and more educating, which requires really good communication skills. So, for those of you who are new to this field, those of you who are interested in kind of breaking in, this education thing is huge. It's one thing to be really good at the tech and really good at the Python or the R, whatever language you happen to use, programming side of it. But I can tell you for an absolute fact, I spend a ton of time communicating, talking about the model, talking about the data, talking about the impacts, talking about deployment plans, talking about where we expose things. And the better you are at that communication piece, the more involved you can be in actually pushing your model out. So let's now get into a use case. Because for me personally, I like to call myself an applied data scientist. There are going to be tons of people out there who are probably better at the math. There are going to be tons of people out there who are probably better at the research side of it. I like to get my hands on the tools in the libraries and figure out how they work or can work for the problems that I'm most interested in trying to solve. So here's my example. You got this company, they're relatively new to predictive analytics, right? So they're new. That means management's new. That means the expectations are probably high. They don't really have an internal data science community of practice. That means most likely you as the new hire, you as the new team, you're trying to figure out where you fit and how you fit. And they've got numerous legacy systems and databases, which most likely means things are not going to be integrated, which means that you as a data scientist are going to have to figure out how to cobble all of these things together. And then there's going to be lots of sort of independent thought. So now let's go back to that problem statement. And this is the one, again, I faced this recently. My problem initially was, tell me when the next event's going to occur, an injury event. Just, just give me your crystal ball. When's that going to happen? So I told everyone, hey, you know what? I'm not Nostradamus. But I tell you what we can do. Tell you what we can do. What we can do is let's talk about developing a risk framework. And this is no different, I think, than maybe how an insurance company might approach a problem, or maybe even a bank may approach a problem in terms of risk. What we're trying to figure out is what patterns are there that seem to be present most of the time whenever we have an event. And if we can build that risk framework, as I mentioned earlier, we can apply it not just to injury events for our employees, but maybe we can apply it to other injury events for maybe non-employees or different areas of the business. So it's still trying to solve this idea of, reducing the number of injuries. It's just approaching it from a more leading kind of way. Item number two, we have all the data in the world. You remember earlier when I said that that oftentimes EDA is your friend? Well, it's really true. EDA is definitely going to be your friend. What exploratory data analysis begins to tell us is where might we have tons of data? And it begins to sort of answer that question of tons of data doesn't mean tons of value. Because oftentimes there's this notion that, oh yeah, we got reams and reams of data, the petabytes and all of that, and let's just go look at our Hadoop cluster. And a lot of that data, frankly, it's useless for some of the problems that we're trying to solve. So let's talk about where are the gaps in our data and what we might be able to do to fix it. And then along the lines of fixing it, what value from a model standpoint do we think that data is going to provide? I can't stress number three and number four enough. Everyone seems to be on this bandwagon now of analytics is cool. Everybody's just going to use it just because. And that's just not true. So you've got a lot of really smart folks out there, especially in management. And these folks didn't get to management and their elevated title and position without some really good instincts, without some really good gut, without some really good customer relationship skills, without being successful in multiple positions. So, what we're trying to figure out is how do we take the science behind machine learning and pair it with all that expertise, right? How do we sort of partner the analytics with the management knowledge and know-how? And again, that's why we kind of come back to this educate, educate, educate. Now, if you're happen to be in a business where everybody's already on board with machine learning and data science, I think that's awesome because maybe your education and selling and all of that, maybe that's to a minimum. Maybe you don't need to do a ton of that. But for a lot of companies that are new to this, I can tell you for a fact, you are going to have to talk quite a bit about helping them understand. Then there's this notion of credibility of these models. In the world of agile, hopefully all of you are becoming familiar with agile methodologies versus sort of traditional waterfall implementations. What you're trying to do there is you're trying to learn and fail fast because through that process, you're building model credibility. You're rooting out kind of the use cases or the test cases that frankly are causing the model to fail, generate false positives, false negatives, et cetera. And you're trying to sort of push higher and higher model performance. And the only way you can do that is through more of an agile, fast prototyping kind of scenario. So keep that item in mind. Not everyone's going to be all rah rah gun ho. You've got to figure out how we expose models, build models that have credibility and frankly impact on the business. And this item here, everybody wants a new iPhone. Well, you know what? Not everybody wants one. I deployed some models and I cannot tell you one of the first feedbacks I got was, you know what, machine learning stuff's kind of cool and everything, but I don't believe it. And oh yeah, by the way, all this machine learning, if you give it to me, I might become distracted. And I kind of need to be able to focus on my job. So yes, the model was integrated and yes, the model kind of provided some insights, but it's not as if people are, there are some folks who, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of folks out there who are just gun ho and they're ready to take the model. But again, some of the times you're trying to influence and drive behavior, you just need to keep in mind that not every user group that you kind of be targeting here is just all gun ho and frankly ready to accept whatever these models happen to be generating. But they might present some opportunities to drive new technology, fix the data, et cetera. And I think that it's just really important for us to keep in mind from a change management standpoint. Oftentimes you need to survey the landscape and figure out what might prohibit your model from pushing forward. And again, is it behavioral? Is it cultural? Is it strategy? Is it a goal that you might not be able to influence? So I built this model. It's in the top left-hand corner, right? And I was using all kinds of cool things, some computer vision, some NLP and all that. And of course, basic classification and the things that you'd expect to see from a tech standpoint. But through that activity, because this particular model had the alignment with management, it was attached to a corporate goal. It was critical, we feel, to transitioning some of the cultural aspects of our business. And now this model's moving all over the place. We use it in how we assign some crews. Uh, we use it to uh, influence how we actually mitigate and look at risk of the work as the work is being planned prior to execution. And now we've got all these use cases popping. You can see those in the bottom right of public safety and some other areas. So this is how one idea from you guys are super talented out there. One idea from a data scientist can drive and change an entire business. And again, if you work in an ad tech or you work at Google or Facebook, you all you know exactly what I'm talking about here. But if you work in a traditional sort of company, utility, industrial company, just keep in mind, you have quite a bit of power in the way that you look at the data and the fact that you have technical skill to drive change strategy, and by virtue of that make significant impact on the business, which frankly gets me super excited. Hopefully you can tell. So in summary, because I believe I'm supposed to wrap up somewhere right around 10:30, what we want to try to figure out is how do we move our models beyond the lab, right? And in doing so, moving these models beyond the lab often is more than the tech that we're using, and it's often more than just the data. Moving these models often, beyond the lab comes down to change management, comes down to alignment, comes down to communication, comes down to marketing. Sometimes we have to sell our ideas. So keep those soft skills in mind. Don't forget, 8 out of the 16 issues that you're most likely going to face with ML have absolutely nothing to do with the tech. It's everything else. And then the example I just gave you, good models have legs. Good models will move beyond the initial problem, and they will be used in other areas of the business, which gives you, the data scientist, an opportunity to learn other parts of the business, become familiar with those challenges and the data and the stakeholders and those other parts of the business. So that's super exciting. But again, if we can start with good problem statements, even if it means you've got to take some time, everyone's under the gun to kind of deliver. But if you can take some time to deliver, create a nice problem statement, that's going to increase the likelihood of moving to prod. And again, let's link our models to the most important challenges. Find the most important challenges. I get a little depressed sometimes when I'm given a cycle time problem or some other kind of what I'm going to call basic IT issue. What I really like to go after are the hardest problems, the biggest challenges in the business, because if we can solve that, then that means that our model has a high likelihood of truly driving change for the business, for our customers, for whoever the targeted stakeholder group happens to be. So, and with that, I just like to close and say thank you again for your time, your attention this morning. And again, definitely stay safe from the COVID. Uh, do what you need to do there to not only maintain your safety, your family safety, but again, your community, super important. And I believe we're at the end here. I think we have some time for questions. Is that right, Ruben?
Yeah, we do have time for questions.
Oh, hey, Nancy. Well, I guess we have a lot of shy folks here. I'm looking here at my app and I don't see any questions on my app, and I'm not sure if there's any questions here on the session.
I was wondering something, if it's okay for me to chime in this way.
Sure.
It isn't. I'm real new, so it's not real important for the client to understand what methods you're using when you go into a project. I'm sorry if that's a basic question, but I was wondering.
I think it's what you're going to find is that there are some users who are incredibly interested in the model that you've chosen to use and why you've chosen to use it. And that's why you're seeing a lot of new Python libraries come out that try to kind of break open the black box, right? Try to sort of explain the features and why those features were chosen and their relationship to one another. But I think you're absolutely right. There's also another population that honestly doesn't really care about the model. They're more interested in the insights, the EDA thing that I talked about earlier. They want to try to understand what the data is just telling them at a very basic level, before we ever get to the actual model. So I think what's important is, as a data scientist, you got to figure out where your audience is, and you might want to start really, really simply, right? With, again, a linear regression or decision tree or whatever, and then see how far that gets you down the road before you start introducing more complex models that, frankly, again, are very difficult to explain.
Thanks.
Yep,
I guess that's why we have Python for people who are interested. Because the joke I saw recently is it's to write Python, you just start writing pseudocode. Just
sure.
very easy to explain to people.
It's very easy to
Yeah,
explain.
yeah.
There's no sort of funky weird things kind of going on in there, and I think most of us would have no problems with opening up our IDE and just kind of walking a user through some very basic code there.
I do see two questions now in the app, by the way.
Okay, let's talk about them.
You mentioned that focus on uh, to focus on the biggest problems. How do you define that in more detail?
What I like to do when I'm talking about focusing on the biggest problems, I like to start at the highest level of the organization. And by that, I mean, what are the key sort of values, the core principles behind your business? The example that I gave you on that use case, one of our core values is safety. So if we can take predictive analytics, advanced analytics, and focus it on one of those core sort of pillars of the business, then there's going to be quite a bit of interest in your model if you can get to one that has some predictive power. So that's why I like to say the next level you might go to is departmental goal, something that people are going to be chasing and following up on some frequency, versus sort of soup du jour, right? What's the problem of the day kind of thing. What we have to figure out is how do we sort of elevate or attach our models to the strategy or strategic goals of the business, to our core principles. And if we can do that, then again, that means our models most likely are going to have some legs. What was the second question?
Second question is, as a new data scientist working as a data analyst, do you have any recommendations on how to shift from data analyst to data scientist at work, non IT company, no AI or ML?
Yeah, I love this question because I think it's super important. And I think that this is why I absolutely love this particular field. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from doing that right now. So, for example, if you're a data analyst and most of what you do is inside of Excel, for example, or if most of what you do is inside of like a Power BI or a Tableau, maybe start experimenting with introducing Python. just very basic, right? Start moving some of those Excel sheets to data frames. Start using some of the tools inside of Python in terms of correlations. Uh, by doing something like that, that's somewhat very simple, what you're suggesting then to the business is that there are other tools and technology that might be able to help our business. Now, that's a very basic step. The other things you can start to do is go off and say to your management, I'm thinking I'm looking for new ways to solve problems. Maybe I need to be AWS certified machine learning engineer or Google GCP machine learning engineer, data scientist. And I think what your management most likely is going to do is they're going to say, well, why do you want to do that? And you're going to say something along the lines of, well, you feel that there's some real value, some tools in there. There's a community of people that are using these tools, and they most likely can help us accelerate and solve some of the challenges that we're kind of going after. If nothing else, it's going to show management that you're more interested or that you are interested in exploring kind of more technical concepts. And then of course that will put a challenge to them if they want to hold on to you, that you need to be challenged and you need to find challenges that again are going to be more impactful for the business. So I like to start in a very basic way, maybe looking internally and saying, can I then go get myself certified on some of these new tools and technologies? And then approach the business and say, look what more I can do, and see then how they leverage you as an asset across the business.
I think we have time for one more question, and then I believe that Hoover will allow for answers after the session. But the last question is, could you talk about your technology stack, i.e. any specific tools you use to help you go from lab to production?
Sure. I personally, I love to spend time in the cloud. So a lot of what my preliminary modeling will be, I might use like a Jupyter for very simple sort of EDA things if I'm sort of experimenting with like CSV files. But at some particular point, I'm going to need to move to the cloud, primarily because the data sets are just going to get too big for my laptop. So what we've got set up is we've got a fairly large database, like an SAP type database, HANA, Hadoop type data. And we're going to move that into some cloud storage. And then that allows us now to run our models, at least train our models inside that environment, that cloud environment. Once we've got a model that's got some predictive power, it all depends now on what the use case is. And you remember earlier, I was talking about how do you expose the model. I'm exposing a model right now inside of Salesforce.com. I've exposed a model inside of a legacy application. A colleague of mine is exploring how he might expose a model inside of our drones and some of our IoT and sensors. So I think to answer that question there, I think you got to sort of separate when we're training models and maybe using cloud to kind of do that versus again when these models move to prod. Where is the prod environment and how best do we do that? And again, it could be IoT, could be again like Salesforce.com or some other kind of app. That's kind of how we go about it. Hopefully that answers your question.
And that's about it. That's exactly time to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I
Jeff
hope
Morris.
everyone
Thank you,
has a great
Jeff, for
day.
your time and
Yeah,
sharing your knowledge.
yeah, thank you guys. Have a great day.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you guys for joining us.